October 8, 1943. 6,000 feet above the Netherlands, Flight Officer Ralph Hofer wrestled the controls of his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. His inaugural combat mission had barely begun, a mere 20 minutes in, yet the Missouri farm boy, who had never before discharged his weapons in anger, found himself confronting a harrowing scene. Through the oil-streaked windscreen, he witnessed a Messerschmitt 109 mercilessly tear into an American fighter. What unfolded next defied every command hammered into him: never abandon formation, never pursue alone, always protect your flight leader. But something inherent in Ralph Hofer, something forged in the wheat fields of Missouri and the boxing rings of Chicago, utterly rejected these ingrained protocols. This moment would become a legend, but the full story of Hofer's improbable success and tragic end holds a twist that only later revelations will fully expose. He veered sharply left, breaking from his flight and diving into the fray. That evening, at Royal Air Force Debden, the gun camera footage of his actions would astound seasoned pilots, many of whom had flown dozens of sorties without ever firing their weapons. A Messerschmitt 109 filled the frame at point-blank range, absorbing a torrent of punishment from 8.50 caliber machine guns. The German fighter rolled, plunged, and disintegrated. On his very first combat mission, the farm boy, who had no prior aviation experience before 1940-41, had achieved the seemingly impossible: he had secured a kill. Yet, that single triumph was merely the beginning of an extraordinary, albeit brief, career. Over the subsequent 9 months, Ralph Hofer would account for 30 German aircraft, employing tactics so reckless, so utterly undisciplined, yet so devastatingly effective, that his superiors were in constant debate whether to ground him or promote him. The sheer arithmetic of his aerial warfare defied all established doctrine. The young man who had impulsively joined the Royal Canadian Air Force would rise to become the 20th highest-scoring ace in the 8th Air Force. He would also earn the grim distinction of being the second highest-scoring pilot killed in action. His narrative illuminates a truth rarely acknowledged by the military establishment: sometimes, the most formidable warriors succeed not despite flouting every rule, but precisely because they do. Born on June 22, 1925, on a farm near Salem, Missouri, Ralph Hofer entered a world where aviation was a distant fantasy for most rural Americans. His father toiled in a region where even automobiles were still considered novelties. The boy destined to pilot the world's most advanced fighter aircraft grew up in a home without electricity or indoor plumbing, with no inkling that the vast sky would one day become his personal domain. When Ralph was 4, his father passed away. His mother remarried, and the boy adopted his stepfather's surname, Hofer. That name would eventually grace combat reports, intelligence debriefings, and memorial services across England. But in 1925, it was simply the name of a Missouri farm boy learning to cultivate the land, repair machinery, and endure the Great Depression. Athletics offered him an escape from the pervasive poverty that gripped rural Missouri throughout the 1930s. In 1940, he clinched a trophy in the Golden Gloves boxing tournament in the light heavyweight division. He also played semi-professional football in Chicago leagues. His exceptional physical coordination, lightning reflexes, and unwavering willingness to absorb punishment and continue fighting were honed in rings and on fields, not in classrooms. The raw aggression that would later strike terror into German pilots was sharpened against opponents at Trafton's gym in Chicago, where his family eventually relocated. He even boxed professionally for a period under the name Holbrook, sparring with the late, legendary Billy Conn. By 1940, Ralph Hofer had abandoned any pretense of formal education. He briefly enrolled in junior college, showing some interest in commercial art, but the structured environment proved stifling. He returned to Missouri, taking a civilian position at Fort Leonard Wood. His vague plans involved heading to California to pursue professional prizefighting. Aviation was not even a consideration. The dramatic transformation from an aimless drifter to a decorated combat pilot occurred entirely by chance. In the autumn of 1941, Hofer journeyed north to Detroit, Michigan. He had secured a contract to deliver a new 1942 Hudson automobile from the factory to a buyer on the West Coast, in exchange for travel expenses. While awaiting the vehicle's availability, he took a day trip across the Detroit River to Windsor, Ontario. An immigration official, mistakenly assuming the young American had crossed the border specifically to enlist, directed him to a Royal Canadian Air Force recruiting office. Hofer had never before contemplated flying. He had never even been inside an aircraft. He possessed no technical education, no navigation skills, no comprehension of aerodynamics or ballistics. Yet, the spontaneous impulsiveness that defined his character took over. On July 19, 1941, within hours of crossing the border, he had enlisted in the RAF as an aviation cadet. The contract to deliver the Hudson automobile was forgotten. California and prizefighting were abandoned. This impulsive decision should have ended in disaster. Aviation training in 1941 demanded mathematical precision, technical knowledge, instrument reading skills, and meticulous adherence to procedure. Ralph Hofer possessed none of these qualities. Yet, astonishingly, he completed elementary flight training in Canada. He mastered basic aircraft control. He passed navigation courses despite having no natural aptitude for the subject. He absorbed gunnery and aerial combat principles despite never having fired a weapon in anger. By October 1942, Sergeant Pilot Hofer shipped to Britain. The RAF assigned him to additional training rather than combat operations. Months passed. The war intensified across Europe and North Africa, with American forces entering the conflict after Pearl Harbor. Yet, Hofer remained in training units, observing the war from the sidelines, growing increasingly frustrated. In June 1943, an opportunity arose. The United States Army Air Forces began accepting transfers from Americans serving in the RAF. With his accumulated flight hours and training, Hofer qualified for immediate assignment to a combat unit. On June 11, 1943, the transfer changed his status from sergeant pilot to flight officer, a unique rank created for non-commissioned pilots. More importantly, it placed him squarely on the path to combat. But first came more training. The Army Air Forces required proficiency in the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a formidable fighter aircraft weighing 5 tons empty, powered by an 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower. The P-47 was unforgiving to careless pilots. Its immense weight and power demanded respect, precision, and skill. Hofer approached it with his characteristic disregard for conventional wisdom. September 1943. RAF Station Debden, Essex. Flight Officer Hofer reported to the 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. He could not have joined a more legendary unit if he had designed it himself. The 4th Fighter Group had been established on September 29, 1942, through the wholesale transfer of 3 RAF Eagle squadrons. These squadrons, 71, 121, and 133, consisted entirely of American volunteers who had crossed into Canada to fight before the United States officially entered the war. The Eagles brought their own distinct culture to the Army Air Forces, fiercely independent, aggressive to the point of recklessness, and contemptuous of peacetime military discipline. They had forged their reputations fighting in Supermarine Spitfires over France and the English Channel. Their transition to American command did nothing to diminish their rebellious spirit. The 4th Fighter Group quickly became renowned as the most individualistic, most aggressive, and most successful fighter unit in the 8th Air Force. Into this environment walked Ralph Hofer, bringing his own unique brand of chaos. With his conspicuously long brown hair, which violated every grooming standard, his bright blue football jersey bearing the number 78 in orange, and his gold snake ring worn on his left hand, he looked more like a college athlete than a military pilot. Around the base, he was often seen with Duke, an Alsatian dog he had adopted from a pilot who had bailed out over France. According to witnesses, Hofer sometimes took Duke on local flights, crouching down to create the illusion of the dog at the controls when passing other pilots. He would even leave his parachute behind to make room in the cockpit. His appearance was merely the surface manifestation of a deeper rebellion. Hofer approached military discipline the way he approached everything else, with cheerful disregard. He was once apprehended by military police in London for not wearing rank insignia. During the arrest, they discovered he was not carrying identification cards. His Class A uniform blouse was tailored in a zoot suit fashion, a style associated with jazz culture rather than military professionalism. Everything about him suggested someone who would wash out of combat aviation within weeks. Then came October 8, 1943. The 4th Fighter Group scrambled to escort Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers attacking targets in Bremen, Germany. Hofer flew as wingman to Captain James Clark, a veteran Eagle Squadron pilot, in a borrowed P-47C-413 marked QPG. His duty was straightforward: stay in formation, cover his leader, watch for enemy aircraft, do not engage unless absolutely necessary, and under no circumstances break formation. Over the Netherlands, German fighters attacked. Messerschmitt 109's dove from above, forcing the American formation to scatter. Hofer's Thunderbolt flicked and spun downwards, emerging west of Zwolle. When he regained control, he found himself alone at low altitude, separated from his flight, and lost over enemy territory on his very first combat mission. The textbook response would have been to climb, orient himself using landmarks and the sun's position, and head west toward England at maximum speed. Hofer ignored the textbook entirely. At low level over the Dutch countryside, he spotted a Messerschmitt 109 chasing a P-47. Smoke poured from the American fighter as the German pilot pressed his attack. The P-47 turned right and dove from 1,000 feet, clearly doomed. Hofer reacted purely on instinct rather than training. He closed on the Messerschmitt at full throttle, accelerating to attack speed. The Messerschmitt 109 pilot, entirely focused on his victim, never detected the threat behind him. At 100 yards, Hofer opened fire. 8.50 caliber machine guns converged on the German fighter. Strikes and flashes erupted along the fuselage. Oil sprayed back, coating Hofer's windscreen. The Messerschmitt 109 rolled over and dove straight down. Hofer had to shove his control stick forward violently to avoid ramming the enemy aircraft. By the time he pulled out of the dive, oil completely obscured his forward vision. He headed west toward the coast at 300 feet, effectively blind. His adventure was still not over. A half-mile offshore, a small German patrol vessel opened fire. Hofer, with no clear forward vision and low on ammunition, took several short bursts at it before turning for England. He landed at Debden hours later, one of the last aircraft to return. Ground crew immediately noticed something unusual: the protective tape placed by armorers over clean gun muzzles was broken. The new pilot had fired his weapons on his first mission, a rare occurrence. When Hofer reported to his intelligence officer and recounted his story, veterans gathered to view the gun camera footage with deep skepticism. New pilots simply did not score kills on their first missions. The statistics were clear: most pilots flew dozens of sorties before even seeing an enemy aircraft clearly enough to engage. The film began to roll. There, on the screen, filling the frame at close range, was a Messerschmitt 109 absorbing devastating fire. Strikes walked up the fuselage. The canopy shattered. Pieces flew off the airframe. The aircraft rolled inverted and dove out of frame. It had happened. The farm boy from Missouri had scored on his first combat mission by breaking every rule he had been taught. Over the next 4 months, Hofer flew regular missions without scoring additional victories. On February 6, 1944, he brought down another Messerschmitt 109 over France. Then, his personal score began to climb with terrifying speed. Between his second victory and the end of May 1944, Hofer would destroy 28 more German aircraft. His tactics evolved in a direction that horrified his commanders while producing undeniable results. March 18, 1944. The 4th Fighter Group escorted bombers attacking Munich. The unit had recently exchanged its P-47s for North American P-51 Mustangs, sleek, long-range fighters that would become the war's most iconic American aircraft. Hofer was assigned to fly the No. 4 position in White Flight, 334th Squadron. No. 4 meant wingman to the wingman, the most junior position in a 4-ship element. His job was simple: stay in formation, do not engage independently. Over Bavaria, Hofer spotted a Messerschmitt 109 below the formation. Without a radio call, without warning his leader, he split from White Flight and Dove. The Messerschmitt never knew what hit it. .50 caliber rounds tore through the fuselage. The German fighter crashed in a ball of fire. Hofer pulled up, looking for his flight. They were gone, far ahead, unaware they had lost their No. 4. While climbing to rejoin, Hofer spotted another Messerschmitt 109. He gave chase. The German pilot suddenly glimpsed the P-51 close behind and immediately bailed out rather than fight. Hofer now found himself completely alone, deep in German airspace, with a malfunctioning radio that prevented communication with friendly forces. The sensible response would have been to set course for England immediately. Instead, Hofer went looking for more targets. He spotted a German airfield and cruised the vicinity, hunting. He chased a third Messerschmitt 109 into clouds and lost it. Disappointed but undeterred, he decided to head for Munich, the original target area, hoping to find his flight. En route, he spotted two more Messerschmitts passing above and in front. Any tactical manual would have screamed at him to avoid engagement. Two enemy fighters versus one American, deep in German territory, low on fuel, radio out. The odds were suicidal. Hofer climbed after them at full throttle. As he did, his Mustang's propeller pitch control malfunctioned. The propeller blades suddenly lost their ability to bite the air efficiently. The engine screamed. Boost and revolutions per minute spiked to dangerous levels. The aircraft shuddered violently and began losing airspeed while the propeller windmilled uselessly. For the first time in the mission, survival calculations entered Hofer's mind. The Swiss border was relatively close. Switzerland maintained neutrality, interning both Allied and German aircrews who crossed its borders. Internment meant survival, though it also meant the war was over. Hofer put the Mustang into a shallow glide toward Switzerland. Once over Swiss territory, he went through the bailout procedure. He jettisoned the canopy, preparing to exit the aircraft. At that moment, the propeller pitch control inexplicably corrected itself. The propeller blades bit air again. The engine smoothed. Flying speed returned. Hofer found himself in an open cockpit P-51 with the Swiss Alps below, his aircraft suddenly airworthy again. He made a quick calculation of remaining fuel. With luck, he might reach England. He averaged his fuel consumption against distance and decided to try. The P-51 flew north and west across German airspace at maximum cruise speed. Wind roared through the open cockpit. The cold at altitude bit through his flight suit. Hours passed. The English Channel appeared. The white cliffs materialized. Kent spread below. Hofer landed at Manston, the emergency field on the Kentish coast designated for damaged aircraft. When ground crew checked his fuel tanks, they found 6 gallons remaining, 6 gallons in a P-51 that burned 50 gallons per hour at cruise power. He had flown home on fumes, canopyless, after destroying 2 enemy fighters alone deep in Germany. This mission made Hofer an ace, with 5 confirmed victories. He was still a flight officer, one of the lowest-ranking members of the 4th Fighter Group's air echelon. His commanders faced an impossible dilemma. His complete disregard for formation discipline and tactical doctrine endangered other pilots. His willingness to engage enemy aircraft alone against any odds violated fundamental fighter doctrine. Yet, he consistently returned with kills. Gun camera footage proved every claim. Intelligence officers could not dispute the results. Through the spring of 1944, Hofer's score climbed. By the end of March, he had added a Focke-Wulf 190 to his victories. In April, 5 more enemy aircraft fell to his guns. On April 22, 1944, he was promoted from flight officer to second lieutenant. The promotion changed nothing about his behavior. Then came the last 10 days of May 1944, a period of aerial combat so intense, so successful, that it defied comprehension. Hofer claimed 14 German aircraft destroyed, combining aerial victories with ground strafing attacks. 14 kills in 10 days. This scoring rate exceeded that of many pilots over entire combat tours. On May 23, 1944, Hofer was promoted again, this time to first lieutenant. On May 24, he shot down 2 Focke-Wulf 190s in aerial combat. On May 29, he destroyed 5 Heinkel 177s on the ground during a strafing run, 4 confirmed and 1 shared with another pilot. These ground victories came from attacks on heavily defended German airfields, where anti-aircraft fire routinely shot down American fighters. Hofer pressed his attacks at minimum altitude, guns blazing, pulling up through flak bursts that shredded other aircraft. On June 2, 1944, Hofer was designated flight commander of a flight in the 334th Squadron. He now held responsibility for leading other pilots. The most undisciplined pilot in the group was now supposed to maintain formation integrity and tactical coordination. He developed a reputation for radio indiscipline that matched his tactical recklessness. Where other pilots maintained radio silence or used brief tactical calls, Hofer filled the frequency with comments. His most famous radio transmission came during a mission over the Alps. While other pilots focused on navigation and threat assessment, Hofer keyed his microphone and said, "Gee, ain't the Alps pretty?" June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces stormed the Normandy beaches in the largest amphibious invasion in history. The 4th Fighter Group flew multiple sorties over the invasion area, protecting bombers and strafing German positions. On his second sortie that evening, Hofer's blue flight from the 334th Squadron caught a German road convoy in Normandy and began strafing runs. They never saw the Luftwaffe fighters above them. A large force of Messerschmitt 109s dove on blue flight while the American pilots were focused on ground targets. 3 of the 4 P-51s were shot down in seconds, only Hofer escaped. He broke hard, dove for the deck, and disappeared into the rapidly growing darkness. Once again, his squadron lost pilots while their most undisciplined member survived. 5 days later, on June 11, 1944, small arms fire hit his P-51 over France. The aircraft became unflyable. Hofer made an emergency landing at a temporary Allied airstrip in the invasion beachhead. He walked away without injury. Later that day, he flew another aircraft back to Debden, bringing souvenirs, a German helmet and a copy of Mein Kampf. Late June 1944. The 4th Fighter Group prepared for Operation Frantic, the shuttle bombing mission that would take American heavy bombers from England to targets near Berlin and then on to Soviet bases in Ukraine. Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, would lead 68 P-51s from the 4th and 352nd Fighter Groups as bomber escorts. Blakesley initially grounded Hofer for the mission because Hofer refused to be vaccinated in preparation for entry into Soviet territory. The vaccinations were mandatory. Blakesley went further, denying Hofer access to the officers' club bar. Only when Hofer finally relented and took his shots did Blakesley clear him for the mission. June 21, 1944, 0728 hours. Colonel Blakesley led the shuttle escort up from Debden. The formation climbed to altitude, rendezvoused with 144 B-17s, and set course for Berlin and eastern Germany. Blakesley briefed his pilots extensively on avoiding combat with German fighters if possible. Anyone forced to jettison drop tanks before passing Berlin would lack the fuel to complete the nearly 1,500-mile trip to Ukraine. The message was clear: stay in formation, follow the plan, do not deviate. The mission proceeded smoothly across Germany and Poland. Over western Poland, 1 Mustang and a B-17 were lost in a brief encounter with Focke-Wulf 190s. Hofer, predictably, became separated during the engagement. The formation continued east and navigated carefully over unfamiliar Ukrainian territory. Blakesley's navigational skill proved masterful. The squadrons of P-51s arrived at Pereaton exactly on time, before an audience of Soviet dignitaries and Red Air Force officers. Blakesley and his pilots taxied into position and shut down. Taking stock of the force, it became clear that all but 2 P-51s had made it. One had been lost over Poland. The other, piloted by Lieutenant Ralph K. Hofer, was missing. As Blakesley later learned, Hofer had become separated during the brief dogfight but continued eastward alone. Navigation never being his strong suit, he made an unscheduled landing at a Red Air Force field at Kiev, well off course. Suspicious Soviet authorities held him in protective custody for 4 days while they verified his identity through proper channels. On June 26, the shuttle force took off from Soviet bases and hit targets in Eastern Europe before flying on to bases in Italy. Released finally by the Soviets, Hofer followed several days behind with 2 other pilots whose Mustangs had mechanical problems. During the flight to Italy, one pilot suggested to Hofer that his heading was wrong. Hofer, confident as always in his navigation despite having no natural aptitude for it, remained adamant he was correct. The 2 others left to pursue a different course. One arrived in Italy at the intended base. One landed in Sicily. Hofer, running out of fuel, followed a flight of British aircraft and landed in Malta, hundreds of miles off course. 5 days later, he rejoined his group in Italy. On July 2, 1944, Blakesley offered his P-51s as additional escorts for 15th Air Force heavy bombers attacking Budapest, Hungary. The mission launched from Foggia, Italy. The 4th Fighter Group climbed to altitude and set course north. Over Budapest, they encountered a large formation of Messerschmitt 109s. A savage melee ensued. Captain George Stanford of the 335th Squadron was leading his flight, with Hofer filling in as his wingman. At the start of the engagement, Stanford suffered mechanical difficulties. His drop tanks refused to jettison, then his engine threw a piston rod, forcing him to break away and head for lower altitude. With no hope of reaching Italy, Stanford belly-landed in a Hungarian wheat field and was taken prisoner. While standing near his wrecked aircraft, Stanford spotted a P-51 buzz him at low level. He recognized the aircraft as belonging to his wingman, Ralph Hofer, who had apparently followed him down to check on his condition. What Stanford saw next made his heart sink. A Messerschmitt 109 was positioned directly behind Hofer in perfect firing position. The Messerschmitt opened fire just before the two aircraft disappeared from sight. When the scattered elements of the 4th Fighter Group returned to Italy that afternoon, 6 Mustangs were missing. Among them was Ralph Hofer. When he failed to turn up the following day, there was no alternative but to officially list Hofer as missing in action. Several weeks later, word arrived through Red Cross channels. Hofer's body had been identified within the wreckage of his P-51 near Mostar, in what was then Yugoslavia, several hundred miles south of Budapest. The exact circumstances remained unclear for decades. The truth emerged slowly over 50 years. Stanford's account, which came to light in the 1990s, was the first break in the case. It confirmed that Hungarian pilot ensign Leo Kraszewski of the Messerschmitt 109-equipped 101st Puma Regiment claimed an American P-51 on July 2, 1944. Kraszewski was killed on July 26, 1944, while attacking 15th Air Force bombers en route to Austria. The Hungarian pilot's claim matched Stanford's account, but it didn't explain why Hofer's body was recovered near Mostar, 300 miles from Budapest. The full story finally emerged in 2003 when aviation historian Troy White published his definitive biography. Through painstaking research in German and Yugoslav military records, White determined that Hofer was not downed by an enemy fighter pilot, but by ground fire over the German-operated Mostar Sud airfield. White's research suggests Hofer may have been attacked and possibly damaged by Kraszewski as Stanford witnessed. Whether Hofer was attempting an emergency landing at the German airfield or, in keeping with his character, intended to strafe it despite damage, remains unknown. What is certain from the records of the flak unit stationed at Mostar Sud is that a P-51 was shot down at low level by a 4-battery flak Regiment 9, Legion Commissar, and crashed into one of the airfield's anti-aircraft emplacements at 12:04 hours on July 2, 1944. The crash killed 2 members of the gun crew and injured 1 other. The body of the American pilot was subsequently identified as 1st Lieutenant Ralph K. Hofer, 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group, USAAF. He was flying a borrowed P-51 B-43 to 6746 marked QPX. He was 23 years old, having turned 23 just 10 days before his death. He had flown 74 combat missions. He had destroyed 30 German aircraft, 15 in aerial combat and 15 through ground strafing. He had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters and the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. He had also been awarded the Purple Heart and the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 3 Bronze Stars. Hofer is buried at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, in Section 79, sites 254 to 255. The grave is a mass burial containing other unidentified American servicemen whose remains could not be separated. Hofer was the 20th highest scoring ace in the 8th Air Force. He was the 2nd highest scoring 8th Air Force pilot killed in action. What the statistics cannot capture is the psychological impact of pilots like Hofer on German aircrews. By spring 1944, the Luftwaffe was bleeding experienced pilots at unsustainable rates. American fighter escorts appeared over German airspace in overwhelming numbers. German fighter pilots faced impossible odds, knowing that American pilots would engage aggressively at any opportunity. Then there were pilots like Hofer who did not simply escort bombers or respond to threats. They hunted. They broke formation to pursue single enemy aircraft deep into German territory. They strafed airfields defended by flak batteries. To German pilots, trained in rigid formations and careful tactical coordination, such behavior appeared insane. What the Germans failed to understand was that pilots like Hofer were not following American tactical doctrine. They were rejecting it entirely. The doctrine emphasized formation integrity, mutual support, coordination of attacks, and risk management. Hofer's approach emphasized individual aggression, opportunistic engagement, acceptance of extreme risk, and complete disregard for coordination. The 4th Fighter Group produced more aces than any other fighter group in the 8th Air Force. 81 pilots achieved ace status with 5 or more confirmed victories. Their combined total exceeded 1,000 German aircraft destroyed. Within this elite community of fighter pilots, Hofer stood out as the most individualistic, most aggressive, and most undisciplined member. Colonel Don Blakesley, who commanded the 4th Fighter Group and flew 490 missions himself without being shot down, had mixed feelings about Hofer. Blakesley valued aggression and results. He despised sloppiness and indiscipline. Hofer delivered the results, while embodying everything Blakesley opposed about military chaos. Their relationship was contentious. Blakesley grounded Hofer multiple times. He denied him privileges. Yet, he kept clearing Hofer for combat missions because the young pilot kept delivering victories. Major James Goodson, another 4th Fighter Group ace who scored 15 air and 15 ground victories, wrote extensively about Hofer in his memoir, Tumult in the Clouds. Goodson described Hofer with fondness mixed with exasperation. The passage recounting the scene at Debden when Hofer failed to return from the Budapest mission reportedly moved readers to tears. The contrast between Hofer and methodically successful aces is instructive. Bud Mahurin, who scored 19.75 victories in Europe, flew with careful discipline. He maintained formation integrity. He coordinated with wingmen. He managed fuel carefully. His success came from the systematic application of tactical principles. Mahurin survived the war, returned to combat in Korea, was shot down and captured, survived prison camp, and retired as a colonel. Major George Preddy, the 8th Air Force's highest-scoring ace with 26.83 victories, combined aggression with tactical precision. He led flights effectively. He protected bombers while hunting enemy fighters. He managed risk while accepting danger. Preddy was killed in December 1944 when American anti-aircraft gunners mistakenly shot down his P-51 during a low-level chase of German fighters. Ralph Hofer represented the opposite extreme. He ignored formation discipline entirely. He separated from flights intentionally to hunt alone. He engaged at any odds without calculation. He pressed attacks when survival dictated escape. His tactics should have gotten him killed in his first months of combat. Instead, he survived 9 months, scored 30 victories, and became a legend. The question that historians debate is whether Hofer succeeded because of his tactics or despite them. Maximum aggression, unpredictability, and willingness to take extreme risks created opportunities that cautious pilots missed. When Hofer broke formation to chase enemy aircraft, German pilots were not expecting a lone American fighter. When he pressed attacks at close ranges, enemy pilots panicked rather than fought effectively. The other argument suggests that Hofer succeeded through luck and natural skill, despite tactics that repeatedly put him at maximum risk. His situational awareness kept him alive when alone and outnumbered. His gunnery skill let him kill quickly before counterattacks developed. His aircraft handling let him escape safely from situations that trapped other pilots. The truth likely combines both factors. Hofer's natural aggression and skill created opportunities. His luck let him survive long enough to exploit them. His tactics maximized short-term success while guaranteeing eventual death. He was always going to die in combat. The only question was how many enemy aircraft he would destroy first. For his squadron mates, Hofer's death carried complex emotions, relief that they no longer had to explain his absences to angry commanders, mixed with grief at losing a friend and respect for his achievements. The young pilot who wore a football jersey and snake rings, who flew with his dog Duke on local flights, who commented on alpine scenery during combat missions, was gone. American war correspondents had lionized Hofer in the months before his death. Virginia Irwin's extensive profile for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in June 1944 captured his personality in detail. She described a young man uncomfortable with hero worship, but aware of his own success. When she asked about being celebrated for conquering conquered peoples, Hofer replied he would go beet red from embarrassment. When asked about his success as a fighter pilot, he called it just one of those things. After his death, tributes appeared in newspapers across Missouri. The local boy, who had drifted through Depression-era jobs, joined the Canadian Air Force on a whim, who flew 74 combat missions while violating every rule, became a symbol of American fighting spirit. In the decades after the war, Hofer's legend grew. Aviation historians researching 4th Fighter Group records found his story repeatedly. His gun camera footage survived in archives. His after-action reports revealed a pilot who engaged enemy aircraft with shocking frequency. His personnel file documented constant disciplinary issues alongside exceptional combat results. He became a case study in the tension between military discipline and combat effectiveness. Modern fighter pilots studying historical aces inevitably encounter Hofer. His story generates debate in every fighter squadron ready room where it is discussed. Some pilots see him as an inspiration, proof that aggression and individual initiative can overcome doctrine. Others see him as a cautionary tale, a skilled pilot whose indiscipline ensured early death. Both interpretations are valid. The broader lesson of Hofer's story concerns the nature of warfare itself. Military organizations exist to coordinate large-scale violence through the systematic application of doctrine. Success depends on coordination, mutual support, and adherence to plans. But warfare also rewards individual initiative, aggression, and willingness to exploit fleeting opportunities. Ralph Hofer existed at the extreme edge of tolerable individualism. His commanders let him operate because he produced results. Had he flown in a unit with less aggressive traditions, he would have been grounded permanently. The 4th Fighter Group provided exactly the right environment for Hofer to thrive, a unit aggressive enough to appreciate his kills, but disciplined enough to function despite his presence. The 30 victories he scored came at a cost beyond his own death. Other pilots died covering for his absences. Formations weakened when he broke away. Missions became more dangerous. His commanders spent hours managing the chaos he created. From a purely mathematical perspective, each German aircraft destroyed represented one less threat to American bombers. By mid-1944, Germany could not replace losses in either aircraft or trained pilots. Every kill mattered. From a systemic perspective, if every pilot in the 4th Fighter Group had operated like Hofer, the unit would have ceased to function. Formation escorts would have disintegrated. Bombers would have gone unprotected. Casualties would have soared. The success of aggressive individual pilots depended on the majority of pilots flying in formations. Hofer was effective because he was exceptional. The 4th Fighter Group's approach was pragmatic. They tolerated Hofer's indiscipline because he produced results while containing the damage his behavior caused. They grounded him temporarily when his actions endangered others too directly. They promoted him reluctantly when his successes demanded recognition. They never resolved the fundamental tension between his value and his chaos. They managed it until he died. Modern military organizations face similar challenges with exceptional performers who cannot or will not conform. Special operations forces partially solve this problem by creating units where aggressive individualism is expected rather than tolerated. Fighter squadrons lack that luxury. They must maintain discipline while exploiting individual talent. On July 2, 1944, a farm boy from Missouri who should never have been a pilot, who joined the Air Force on a whim, who flew 74 combat missions while breaking every rule, who destroyed 30 German aircraft through sheer aggression, flew into anti-aircraft fire at a Yugoslav airfield and died. He was 23 years old. He left behind a mother in Colorado, friends in Debden, a dog named Duke, and a reputation that would perplex military historians for 70 years. The 4th Fighter Group continued operations through the end of the war in May 1945. By war's end, they had destroyed over 1,000 German aircraft in aerial combat and ground strafing. 81 of their pilots achieved A status. The unit became the most successful fighter group in the 8th Air Force by most metrics. Within that remarkable organization, Ralph Hofer remained unique. Not the highest scoring ace. Not the most skilled pilot. Not the most decorated. Simply the most aggressive, most undisciplined, most individualistic fighter pilot in a unit known for producing aggressive, individualistic fighter pilots. His tactics should have killed him in weeks. Instead, he survived 9 months and destroyed 30 German aircraft by refusing to fly the way he was trained. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of Ralph Hofer's story. Military organizations train individuals to operate in systematic, coordinated ways. Most of the time, this approach produces optimal results. But occasionally, individuals emerge who succeed by rejecting the system entirely. These exceptional individuals create problems for command structures while delivering exceptional results. The 4th Fighter Group chose to tolerate Ralph Hofer until he died. They could not tame him. They could not replicate him. They could not fully understand him. They could only watch in amazement as a farm boy from Missouri who wore football jerseys and flew with his dog destroyed German aircraft at a rate that defied doctrine until the day anti-aircraft fire over Yugoslavia ended his brief, violent career. His story stands as testament to a truth military organizations rarely acknowledge: sometimes the greatest warriors succeed not despite breaking every rule, but because they break every rule. Ralph "Kid" Hofer was not a good soldier. He was a brilliant fighter. In war, that distinction matters more than any regulation he violated. The men who fought against America left the most honest record of its power. Battlescars brings you one of those stories every single day. If this one held you to the end, subscribe, tomorrow's story is already waiting. And your next one is right here.